Sadly, the video that I wanted to upload today wouldn't get off of the device that I had recorded it on. So until I can figure that out, we're still doing the podcast. I have some thoughts. By the way, welcome back to the Weird Queer podcast. We're still on mental health right now. So right now, I have a bone of contention because there was something that was sent to me, and I thought that this would be the perfect topic for a weird queer podcast video. So you know, all the time when there is a shooting, mental health gets blamed. When that's simply not the case. Uh, People with mental health problems are more likely to be hurt by others than to hurt other people. It's just a misconception, and it's dangerous because then we're attacked, or people with mental health issues are treated like they're dangerous when they aren't. They're only dangerous typically to themselves, not really other people. And then rare instances where people with mental health problems hurt others are then blown way out of proportion to kind of push this narrative that mentally ill people are dangerous to others, when that's really not the case. I saw something, and it was about children in psychiatric units and the way that they are, like, there's no room for them. Well, there's another thing that no one talks about, is that the way that children with mental health issues are talked about, them having, like, if you're talking about a kid with autism, them having meltdowns is considered a temper tantrum, and they're just disregarded. And parents who don't really know what to do with their mentally ill kid, they're treated like it's their fault, like they have a parenting problem, or that it's just you need to learn to discipline your kid more, when in reality a kid just needs therapy and medication. And then when that kid is denied that, it becomes really dangerous for that child. So, for example, when I was younger, I was undiagnosed with having autism spectrum disorder, and a characteristic of that is meltdowns, like hitting yourself, throwing things, rocking, things like that. I had those symptoms, and because at the time everyone was perceiving me as female, females statistically go undiagnosed for years. It's really hard to get diagnosed when you're perceived as female as having autism spectrum disorder. Whereas now that I'm perceived as male, when I talk about all the things that I did as a kid, um, people go, well, how did they not know? Well, because when I was presenting those behaviors, people didn't see the boy in front of them. They saw some girl that I wasn't. So that is a huge problem. Like, we gender mental health, and we are really quick to point out issues in boys because boys are supposed to be this way, whereas girls are supposed to be this other way, and it's really a problem. But the main issue that I have is the way that we talk about kids having, I guess, psychotic episodes, for lack of a better word. We call them temper tantrums. We say that it's a parenting problem, and it really isn't. It's a serious thing, and we restrain kids who are on the spectrum. Who, if you restrain a kid on the spectrum, if they're not hurting themselves, you're just causing more distress, and you are in essence dragging out a meltdown or a sensory overload problem. But anyway, back to what I was saying was, when I was in school, uh, I was treated by teachers like I was just this attention seeker, or like my parents couldn't do their job right. And that's a problem. We're so quick to, dismiss mental health until it suits us. In my town, we are only recently putting up a ward for adults. I live on the eastern end of Washington State, and we are just now building an adult psychiatric unit separate from our hospital, and it will have a lot of beds. But for the longest time, we only had like 5 or 6 adult beds, whereas we had, I think, 21 for teenagers. And the majority of our that's another thing, is the majority of our homeless population in my city are mentally ill people, who just, they can't reach services because the only services are on the west side of the state. And I think that we just, as a society, fail mentally ill people. We stigmatize them, we push them into corners, we only talk about mental health when there's a shooting, or some kind of terror attack, and we don't look at the problem, which is, well, when there isn't a shooting, which now is becoming rarer and rarer, these people still exist, and they're still in need of help. Mentally ill people who are homeless, they need a lot of the time they need medication and therapy and help, reintegrating back into everyday life and society. But instead of, being like, we should take care of these people, we throw them off into the fringes of society, which is appalling and so awful. And when we see them as children, we just assume that it's a parenting problem, to the point that parents then just feel, distress, and it breaks up marriages and it leads to abuse. Parents don't want to deal with their kids, and it's just awful. And I am a prime example. My whole childhood, I know what it is like to deal with the mental health system and be kind of screwed over by it. I know what it's like for, the things in place to help me to actually hurt me. When I was in the fourth grade, I again was undiagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and I played pretend because I didn't have any friends to play with. Because when you're a kid, you play pretend, and at that age, typically, you stop playing pretend, and you build friendships. But because I wasn't doing that, a psychiatrist, so the person that prescribes you medication, he talked to me and he asked me, well, what do you do if you don't play with other kids? And I described me playing pretend. But what he heard was, so you're, schizophrenic, which you can't diagnose a kid with schizophrenia. You can't. It's like, it's unethical. The DSM doesn't allow it. And then I was prescribed an antipsychotic. I was also prescribed Abilify, and Abilify, if you know, is not recommended by the FDA for anyone under the age of 18, let alone a fourth grader. Um, and it aggravated my problems. And instead of looking into, because there's this stigma that people on the spectrum are little white boys who like trains, you know there was a period of my life where my mental health got worse because I was on a medication that was making me worse. I was in the sixth grade when finally it all exploded. The medication caused me to hallucinate and actually caused me to uh, have a lot of physical health problems as well. But on Halloween, when I was a sixth grader, I was hallucinating and I thought that we were gonna, get killed by something chasing our car, and so I tried to break out the back window. Um, and so then I was hospitalized in the children's ward for like a week when I was in the sixth grade. And, that was finally when someone was able to look at me and go, y'all are stupid. This kid obviously has um, autism, and I don't know. But of course, that person was a specialist. But that stigma of, you know, this kid's just throwing a temper tantrum, this kid's just this kid's just that, this kid can't have this, it hurts kids because then you have a kid who is just unnecessarily on medication that they don't need, or put through hell, or hallucinating because of the medication they're on, and that's just awful. And instead of only talking about these things when there is a tragedy, we need to talk about them all the time. And if we're going to talk about them when there's a tragedy, we need to be honest, which is that people with mental health problems don't shoot up schools. Like, and don't just run people over with their car. Like, in my hometown, there was a shooting, a school shooting, and people were quick to be like, oh, well, mental health. Well, no, because, the shooter here, and I'm not going to name any names because that's just, it's not. Um, I think I know a little bit more about it just because of who I know that's connected to this person. They were trying to say that it's mental health, blah blah blah, and the things that this kid is saying, I have said before. Bullying and all those things. Well, lots of kids get bullied, and lots of kids have depression, and lots of kids want to end their lives, and lots of kids don't shoot up schools and don't seek out to hurt people. So to say that it's as easy as, oh, it's mental health, well, that doesn't mean anything. Um, just because you have a mental illness, it doesn't make you more likely to hurt someone. And I think that, you know, we would be way better off if we could break that stigma down. And it would start with, not only talking about mental illness when there is a shooting or some kind of tragedy. And we only say it too, which is fascinating, is we only call it a mental health thing when the person who's doing this crime is white, which is so ridiculous, but whatever. Um, but I don't think that, it's evil or whatever. I think that mental health problems are real, but we need to talk about them like they are real and not like they're just something that you can use as an excuse for a shooting or some tragedy. People with mental health problems typically, you know, aren't dangerous. Um, and on the note of autism and the spectrum, the Newtown shooting, you know, they not Newtown, Sandy Hook. The Sandy Hook shooting, they tried to say that, well, the reason he did that was he had Asperger's syndrome. And I remember watching the news and them sitting there saying, well, he did have this thing. And I'm like, cool. That's like saying he had blue eyes. That doesn't mean anything, because kids on the spectrum, especially kids on the spectrum, are never like seeking out of hurting other people. And that's just hurting people on the spectrum. That's what you're doing. You're creating a stigma for them to be even more ostracized from society. Stigmatizing mental health ostracizes people with mental health problems. It doesn't do you any good. It doesn't do them any good. It just causes more issues. And, stigmatizing that people who shoot up buildings and bomb places are mentally ill causes more harm than it does good.